Oh, good afternoon. Well, it has been probably 6 months since I did a stream. Um, and yeah, I haven't actually shared the URL because I'm just going to share the video later because I'm hoping I'm not going to have any streaming issues, but I figured it was probably sensible to do it as a video as well as the stream. Anyway, we're trying not to go on for too long, but I just wanted to cover the main things on the higher time frames, probably more than anything else. And these streams, like, they help me figure things out myself. So we'll start obviously with Bitcoin. Okay, so this is the full picture of everything since 2011, the start of Bitcoin, and we've had this long-term parabola, which was the pink line. So I've made some adjustments to this since I've last shared it, and the parabola, the pink, was the original one, but since 2017 and then 2021 didn't quite hit that parabola. I've then just revised it. Now these parabolas are just they're kind of integrated into TradingView, but I don't consider the curves the most accurate. But it's kind of interesting that this, the top that we've just had pretty much coincides with the previous two. So there's a bit of a rollover there, and we've always thought that we're going to get diminishing returns on Bitcoin anyway, so that's nothing overly surprising. So that's kind of one of the key things, that we're seeing that diminishing return already. Secondly, while everybody's freaking out, I do remember, like, previous waves have dropped. The early wave 86%, previous 2018 dropped 84%, and then 2021 77%. So at the moment we're only about 50% down from the top. So we still have plenty of scope to go lower. Plenty of scope to go lower if it wants to. The diminishing returns also are diminishing decreases, so it could end up, somewhere above 77%. But 50 to 60%, if this was the bottom, wouldn't be out of the realms of possibility either, based on very limited data points. But the decreasing drop each time. My only concern with that is, again, if we look at 2018, we dropped to the 38% fib of the last up move. At 2021, we dropped to the 50% fib. So again, it's only 2 data points, but it's increasing in the amount of retracement it does on the bull run. So here, again, we haven't even hit the 38 yet. The 50 would be in the annual zone, which is this grey zone, the annual demand, at around 44k. And then the 61 fib would be a bit lower inside that. So again, don't be surprised if the price does fall further. It's perfectly reasonable for it to. What else? From a supply-demand perspective, I'll go to my other chart in a minute so you can see. Obviously previously I've been looking at the 3-month demand here and a 2-month demand sitting inside it. So we've come down into those. So from a supply-demand perspective, we're still holding demand as we expect. What I don't like, if you look at the lower time frames, is how slowly it's come off that level. And I kind of look back at previous levels, and I guess we do sometimes have slow accumulation, but again, like, with the risk this is going to drop down, it's not really what I'm still kind of looking for, is what retracement we're going to get before the next drop. But I don't want to be too biased in that direction. So again, as always, oh, hi, I'm just reading the chat. Yes, this is Bitcoin, and it's definitely dropping more this year, unfortunately. Yes, it very probably is. As I'm just saying, the only thing counter to that is that this is a 3-month demand. So for me, I don't counter trade a 3-month demand, even if I think it's weak or I think there's other reasons. I'm a bit loath to short into a 3-month demand. So obviously here I've just been waiting. I've put some short entries in, but more long entries, at least maybe a month ago. Like I said, I'll go to the low time frame in a minute, but I just wanted to cover this first. The other issue we've had is we've closed down here, such that now the 3-month, let's go to the 3-month chart. So we've now dropped below this. We had a 3-month demand high, and we've now dropped below that. So again, we've got a risk at this current level and various other levels, but also that we reject around the 83K mark on a retest of that 3-month supply, although a bigger zone. Similarly, there's a monthly at the top. So while we've still got decent demand in place, we now have the risk that when we come back up, if we come back up to test these areas, that we then see the bigger drop from there. The other thing that's always interesting off this chart, just to double check and to remind people about, is the timing. So this green at the top are the timings from top to top, I believe. So yeah, so back from 2014 to 18, we had 1,491 days. The days are slightly dubious, but yeah, broadly 1,490 days, then 1,430 days from top to top, 2018 to 2021. 1,430 days again, top to top, from 21 to 25. So that was very interesting. Like, we noted that, like, when we hit that top back in October, and it really was almost to the day from the previous run. So similarly, if that was the top, and if we were to follow the same pattern, that, you know, then the next top we expect, where's that, September 29. So we've got a while to go till the next top. Then the coloured zones I have down here are from the halving. So the vertical line is the halving. So back in 2017, we had 518 days from halving to top, then a 365-day drop, and then 517 days to the next halving. And again, these numbers are very, very similar for the next run. So again, 549 days, very similar to 518 days, or 20 days off. Almost exactly a year drop again, and then another 517 days to the next halving. So again, if we are to follow that pattern, we've already had the top to top pretty accurately, 548 days, very, very similar to the 21 bull run, slightly longer than the previous. If we have 365 days to the bottom, then we're expecting the bottom around October this year. So that's going to be an interesting thing to watch. Reiterate again, we've got very few data points. So, like, you know, when we're looking at a sample size of 2 and saying the third time is going to be the same, obviously it's only happened twice before. It doesn't have to happen the same every time, but they're just interesting things to be aware of if the price is at an interesting spot. So, you know, if we do run up here a little bit, you know, and come back down, that's probably a bit optimistic, that run up. But, you know, if we come back down and we end up somewhere around here at the time October happens, then that would be a perfect time to look to buy, if you haven't already in this zone. And then what else? And then, yeah, another 548 days to the next halving, which would be April next year. And then typically we expect what happens at the halving, the yellow zones. So I suppose they're just a bit kind of mixed, up and sideways, or up and then more up, leading out of the halving. But yeah, so the timings are interesting on that. What else on this chart? Oops. Not much more really. I think, yeah, as I say, the things to be aware of, you know, the previous drops have been significantly more than what we've seen so far on this retracement. There could be some differences based on the institutional involvement now. So that's the other thing as to whether this is the same. I did see another article of somebody saying that they didn't believe the cycles were the same, and I think they had some reasoning. I can't remember. I read it while I was on holiday, so I can't remember what the reasoning was, but they thought the 4-year cycle was going to be no more, and had fairly good reasoning as to why. I didn't save that somewhere. So who knows, maybe this 4-year cycle will stay the same, maybe it won't, but those are the things to be watching out for on the timelines. And then, as I say, on the fibs, if we ignore supply and demand and we're just trading purely on fibs, then we potentially expect this to do a deeper retracement, you know, anywhere from, you know, 56, 57 would be the most aggressive, and then down to where we would typically enter in the discount golden fib zone from 61 to 78. We would be entering, you know, around 25 to 30k there. So that's based on fibs, and that also would coincide with this blue potential new parabola, and secondly with monthly demand in there, and thirdly with the bigger retracements that we've seen 84 and 77 from the previous two bull runs. I'm going to go down to the lower time frame, a little bit lower time frame on this chart, just to talk about something else quickly. So there were a lot of people who, so if you follow me, you'll know I was tracking this up move. I've got these on some other chart somewhere, actually. Sorry, I haven't streamed for so long. I'm trying to remember what I've shared and not shared. And I think, yeah, so I was tracking similarities between these last up moves and seeing similarities coming in here, and obviously with the double top over here and then a slight higher high there. And then when we dropped, everybody else started to notice it, and then we had this consolidation here, which everybody was then comparing to this, and myself too at the time. And again, we've had the drop coming out of there as was surprisingly easy and tradable on Bitcoin. My concern on this is, so now people are saying, oh, well, now we're down here, and they're comparing this bottom. And, while they could be right, because as I said, we are on the 3-month demand in here, my concern is, sort of other differences. So over here, this was held up by this, whatever, weekly, 2-weekly demand or something in there. So when we had this retracement, it came down into that demand, it tried again, it failed to make a higher high, it came down into that demand, again, really barely got about the second time and then broke down through it. The difference here is that this zone hadn't hit, like this would be the major zone, or this, so this zone would be the equivalent of that over here. But what this did was it front ran this zone and went up again and again, failed, and then came back down into there. So it's then followed the same pattern, but now essentially we're testing this zone, potentially, if we're to make the pattern comparison anyway. So again, as to maybe that means this zone will hold and we're not, we are going to see the sort of consolidation through here. But then I guess the other risk is that we haven't, in fact, we consider that test to be here, then the higher high, then the test, and that in fact this is happening now in here. Don't know if that makes sense. So just move some of my drawings again. If anyone's here, let me know if that makes sense. Yeah, so basically, that's the zone, that's actual support. This is actual support. This was a front run, so when people are treating this like it was support, that to me wasn't support. And from a supply demand perspective, I don't see that as support. It stopped in the middle of a candle. People use their sort of fair value gaps and things like that. Maybe it had a test of that level. I'm not 100% sure if it was just testing that at the wick. Possible. I do draw my zones off bodies, and maybe, the wicks, I tend to find it's reliable enough off the bodies, but yeah, sometimes, you are going to get front run. But the thing is, so I guess my perspective of this is, if we're still comparing these two patterns, then I still feel that we could end up with a consolidation like that. It could get everybody all excited, and then do this move. So that's just something to be aware of again, before you get too excited. So at this point, as I say, there's a lot of conflicting TAs. So it's up to you what you want to trade. If you want to trade this, if you're a very high time frame trader, as a 3-month demand with your stop underneath here, there is nothing wrong with that. It's up to you is what I should say. It's not ideal having your stop right under there, because then you're right on the annual level. But if if you want to DCA in here, if you've already started DCAing, assuming this will hold, and you have an appropriate risk management and stop loss, that's entirely up to you. There's nothing wrong with doing that. Some of the TA, based on historic patterns and based on comparing to this pattern, based on the drops that we've had previously that I've just talked about, this is possibly too aggressive for a bigger picture entry. But it doesn't mean it's going to be wrong. If you're already in this, we do have a 2-week demand in here. Again, my concern was we also had a 2-week demand here, and then went straight back through it. So I've got some long entries in here, long alerts, as I normally put the alerts. But I've said to the group just to be a bit wary of those, because, you know, we are now at the point that if we are playing this out, then potentially this could just fall through everything. So just need to see the reaction when we get to those zones, I guess. I think that's it on this time frame, on the very high time frame. Does anybody around have any questions? Give me a shout. Otherwise, I'll go over to my normal chart, which has not too much on it. And I tried to cut this down because last year this got kind of ridiculous, because I really was sort of getting far too low time frame on this, really. This, you know, I try and stick with daily at a minimum. Occasionally I'll throw in some 12-hour like locally, but then I'll delete those later. So anyway, what this shows you is, you know, that closed below this 3-month level. So this is a big 3-month supply now. It's not a great one, it's offset, but that's a level to watch out for if we do push it a little bit higher. Previously I've talked about the possibility of rejections. Here we have 2-3 week supply. So again, these are all zones, and once we've fallen this much, and this is a similar problem I'm having with alts at the moment, is that, so if this is the bottom for now, are we going to retrace, you know, where we're rejecting now is just daily supply. Are we going to reject here for a lower low? Are we going to go up to the weekly, or up to this 3-month even for a lower low? Are we going to go up to the weekly for a lower low? You know, we can still get all the way back up here and still be in a bearish trend. Alternatively, you know, that get back to the bearish scenario, but there is also no reason why, as I've said, this is 3 months demand, why we might not see this and off. But the point is, it's like where to look for rejection. So, and there's a lot of zones when you've fallen this much without testing. There's a lot of areas that you can get to, and I'll get back to. So, as we always do, we look at zones as and when they hit. If I go down to the daily, you know, this was very obvious daily zone. We had an alert go for the first hit on it. We've also got a CME gap, which starts up here and ends down here. And so one of the other things that we've seen in the past is that price can reject at the bottom of the gap. And obviously it took out those wicks as well, which helps. So we saw that rejection there. So those were the kind of first two local areas I've been recently looking at for the short entries. And now it's simply a question of seeing, you know, what reaction do we get on this 2-week demand, the big blue zone. And again, it's just, it's so choppy, and this is not corrective. Like it is pushing, but it's a very choppy, slow move, which makes it hard to judge. And then, you know, when you start looking at, okay, so we've got a daily demand in there, that's tested. So 3-day just below it, that would be also a retest of this 3-month level. Then we've got a gap in this monthly in here and a CME gap. Another CME gap down the bottom, plus all these trend line stops. But as I always said previously, you know, we could go down like this, test all of them, or we could just throw a candle straight through it. So again, I leave the alerts in, and I just say be wary, and I wouldn't be limit ordering any of these particularly at the moment. And yeah, so we're seeing this upward channel. I compare back to the previous 2021. What else are other things to be aware of in here? I think one thing I didn't really comment on, though, also when talking about the bigger picture, and one thing I commented on the other day, was just the lack of impulsivity of this move. So we had this very strong bull move back in 2021. We had this very strong bull move back in 2018. And if you compare that to this, and I said in the group that it's difficult because it's Bitcoin and because we do have the institutions coming in, so maybe they're stabilizing it. But, you know, what's this? Like, I'm quite impulsive there. But compared to these, this is pretty average. And if I saw this on an altcoin, I would just think, well, it's losing steam and it's going to drop all the way back down there. So that, you know, an alt, I absolutely would think is going to go down here. And, you know, I don't want to get emotional about Bitcoin and say that Bitcoin's not going to do that, because, you know, that's emotion talking. And people say, you know, if it goes to 10K, then nobody's going to buy it, it's going to go to 0. And I don't necessarily believe that. But I do think, you know, it's worth considering how relatively weak this is. But we have the institutional involvement. Maybe they can hold it up. I'm not really sure. So there's lots of what ifs and things like that, and I like to think about all those. But at the end of the day, we just trade supply and demand as and when they hit. If they have confluence with Fibonacci's, etc., then that's what we look for. And all the other stuff, whether it's going to follow a similar pattern to something else, we're just looking, and we're looking for signs. So as and when it gets to this, so it got to this area and it kind of hit the top of the channel, is it now going to fall back through here? If it gets to this 2 week and it seems to start to bounce, then maybe you bring your stop to break even. All those things to take note of. Excuse me. How long are we going? 23 minutes. So on the long side, I've talked about the short side. So yeah, again, I've got lots of alerts all through up here, and again, just zones as and when they hit. On the long side, it's the same. So we had, I had an alert for the 3 month demand. I had an alert for the 2 month inside, or 1 month and then 2 month inside it. That one, not really necessary. So various alerts. So this is the big picture alerts. Next things I'm looking for if we do drop. So again, you can just look at what low time frame long entries you may get through here if they present themselves. A couple of things that I'm looking for down here. So I've talked before about the annual level. So I've got an alert down there for 46k. So obviously that zone would be somewhere to look for an entry if it does revisit there. It is of note that it's never visited an annual in the past, I don't think, and it does tend to front run. So on that basis, I've also got an alert in here. So something I've talked about many times before and we've seen many times on the chart is the 113 to 127 fib. So I think this is probably the clearest one for me to show. Is that. So extension. So quite often we'll have the final move. So in this case, it's a downtrend. We'll have the final move and then a stop hunt essentially that won't go anywhere necessarily particularly significant, but will stop in the 113 to 127 fib area. And like I normally put that in, so this is a bit deeper in that. I went to the 127. I just changed to the linear chart there. I prefer fibs on the linear scale normally for smaller time frame fibs anyway. So yeah, 113 to 127 fib area. So we did a stop hunt down into there, and then is when we rallied. There are a bunch of different ones up here. Then you can look back on the chart. It's not always the case, but it does happen relatively often. So if I look at that last up move, again, this wick came into the 113 to 127 fib. So what I've done over here is just alerted that area on the same basis. So this is, you can see the one fib is from bottom to top here. And I've drawn the box from the 113 to the 127, including both the linear and the log charts. So yeah, so it looks slightly off because I think the top of it is the log, and I think the bottom of it is the linear. Just to cover all bases, but yeah, just something to look at. Also, where are we there with 54 to 57k? Just watch out for the possibility of a bounce somewhere in this area if we're potentially going to front run these annual levels. Then as we get deeper, we've got a 3 month demand that's untested below. So while, I'll go back to the log chart, while we have PA from the previous up moves that can, the support side, like for example here, like I say, we didn't quite test the annual demand there. While we're saying that maybe this wave is looks weaker, but is actually more sustainable based on the institutions now being involved, we could also see the same to the downside. So where we previously had big retracements that don't look so bad on the log chart, but look horrendous on the linear chart, but 80-90% retracements in these two, maybe 70% here and 88% there, or whatever it was. Maybe we're not going to have such aggressive retracements. Maybe we'll have more bounces, maybe it'll be slower, and maybe it'll go deeper. So I wonder, if we went down by my measuring tool, if we went from the top, selecting, okay, if we went from the top, let's say we did retrace I mean, there's still only 82% for it to get back down to the weekly demand there at the bottom, or 85%. So again, that would be the same as the previous waves. It would be slightly more nerve-wracking than the previous waves because the previous have been very impulsive, like they haven't tested. When we say impulsive, we mean it hasn't come back, it's just come back a little bit into the range of the previous wave and then it's run again. No, I don't have the earliest wave on this chart because it's the BitMEX chart. But yeah, I mean, I guess it does concern me that, you know, at some stage, are we going to do a full retracement of the entire up move? Short golden, you know, with the 61 fib being back down at 4K. You know, it's entirely possible. We had a big wick down here. We have an area that wasn't tested. So I know people freak out when they hear things like that, and that's, you know, not surprising, I guess, if you're an investor, but you do have to have a risk plan for these eventualities. And certainly, you know, while we all have the emotional Bitcoin thing, if we look at this chart, you know, admittedly without the history from the prior wave here, you know, if we do have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, this is, you know, showing signs of the weakness of a 5. Might not, you know, maybe wave 3 isn't the longest, which is supposed to be one of the rules. I'm not sure, and I'm not an Elliott waveitician. Don't take this as like proper Elliott wave analysis, but you know what I do look for is that if we've had you know 3 pushes to the upside, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, fifth is weaker, then it is entirely possible that we retrace the entire up move, and we see that on alts all the time. So is it really out of the realms of possibility that we're going to see it in Bitcoin as well? Anyway, we will cross that bridge when we come to it. I think that's pretty much it on Bitcoin. There's just just quick view there of the short potential entries, and there's far too many of them. So really, you just need to look at zones as and when they hit. We're looking at that 54 to 57K if we get down there for the failed wave entry. I don't think I didn't say that. The 113 to 117 is to 127 is the failed wave on harmonic TA. And then annual demand, you know, and if annual demand starts breaking, then I think we probably will be a little bit worried. But for now, we're just following local patterns. Moving on to Ether, I think there's probably not a great deal of difference in this. So Ether, just trying to think if there's anything else I need to say on Bitcoin with the previous patterns. Probably isn't. One thing I just want to look at quickly. Oops, lost my chart for a minute. Oh, what's happened? I don't know what that is. You just move that away for the moment. Don't know what happened there. And one of the windows I think popped out, but I'm not sure which one. Let me just go to the Binance chart quickly because I know I was playing with it, drawing patterns and things. Yeah, so I think this is when I was last explaining why that wouldn't necessarily be there and why it could potentially be lower. And I think I was also sort of saying, you know, that if we followed the similar pattern, again, that's not out of the realms of possibility. If we followed a similar pattern to the previous wave, the previous bear market, what other drawings have I got in here? It's going to be kind enough to load them, which maybe it isn't. What that pop-out window happened with that, that's slightly strange. Oh, here we go. So you just hide all those brush strokes and maybe it wasn't on this picture. Looking at my folders, obviously I'm trying to draw some Wyckoff distribution things as well. Yeah, it's really just the bar pattern there. Maybe I'd have this on another chart, or maybe I've deleted it by mistake. Three-week levels, random fractal. Got a lot of stuff from historically, not so much from now, so I don't know what's happened with my drawings on that, or I'm looking at the wrong. There's so many charts, and I keep so many different bits of analysis. Oh, maybe here it's the Coinbase one. This is what I was looking for. Okay, yeah. So This, yeah, one of the things I noticed, so I haven't commented on this. So this is the entire fractal of the entire chart. So I must have it here somewhere. Yeah, so what I was doing initially, I kind of noticed that there were similarities with this strong wave, and then weak wave. And I kind of noticed there were some similarities with this last up move. So initially I was kind of saying, okay, I think I'll overlay the whole thing. And I think I was using this last wave to overlay the whole chart, but then I actually don't like that so much, because actually this is further behind now, if that makes sense. So it's been a while since I've looked at this, so it's quite hard to judge. But yeah, you can see here, if you overlay the current price action over the previous, that there are those similarities there. And I guess my concern with looking at all of these is, I need to kind of brush up on this again, is that if this is a small fractal of the bigger picture, such like that, then what this is basically saying is that this has come back down now to that 3-month demand, but this is basically saying that this is going to come back down to here. And then we just need to see what happens thereafter. Anyway, I'm probably being slightly confusing with that, because, yeah, as I say, it's been a while since I've looked at it, but it was an analysis that I was doing of that bigger picture. So if you want to go away and look at it yourself, basically what I was kind of doing is going, okay, we have this last up move, we had one move, we had a retracement, we had another move, we had a retracement. I think I was just doing not this bottom section, but just from the last section here. And then just comparing how much we'd retraced here, and if that happened in the bigger picture, what would happen. So again, something, and that's very much on the bearish side, sorry about that, but yeah, something to be very aware of there. Okay, back to the original chart, and I think back onto Ether with 35 minutes. So Ether, again, maybe I've got some previous drawings in here, or maybe I haven't. Predictions. This was just everything, not that. Put things back. Back to where I was previously. Maybe I've done this more verbally, I'm not sure. So anyway, I'll use this chart on Ether because it's got a bit less on it, and also because you can see what's broken. So one of my concerns, my bigger concerns with Ether, is that while we had a lot of demand in here, it wasn't strong demand. And the critical thing was that we took out this high, and if we take out that high, then normally in a range we expect to take out the low, because what it's telling you is that whatever demand it's hit here at the low is not strong enough to propel a decent up move. So my bigger concern in the bigger picture on Ether is that while we had, monthly demand, 3-month, 2-month demand, as these arrows, that these are weak demands. They could garner some sort of bounce, sure, but they're weak demands. This low hadn't hit the annual demand, much the same as Bitcoin hasn't hit the annual demand. So this is not a strong demand either. If this wicks down into here, you expect this to go all the way. And the fact now that this has been unable to take out the high in any significant manner, again, for this to come down and take out this low, come down into that annual demand before the bigger up move, again, is completely reasonable. And we're sort of seeing similar. So while my concern was, from a supply demand perspective, take that 6 months out, so that's looking like it's going to be the other way around. So we had closed above this candle, giving us a 3-month demand. It was a massive one, but we did have that, so we had to look for longs on that basis, on the supply-demand basis. Then there's nothing on the 2-month. Then we had a monthly inside, so that was kind of my last hurrah level. But what happened is we ended up going straight through it. I'm going to take these arrows off because they won't I think I was just using them in a video and they're not overly useful. Anyway, so you can see we've come straight back down through that demand. Delete, delete. Just deleted the 6 month, but now, okay, that's fine. And we will say so much the same as Bitcoin. Oh no, we haven't. Sorry, I was going to say we've flipped the 3 month, but we haven't. So we're still inside this giant 3 month demand. We have retraced, significant amount of this last up move. So on, if you're just looking at waves up and you're only looking at immediate PA, maybe it's possible this takes another run up. That would be the bullish case, I guess. And the fact we're in overall 3 month demand. But the bearish case is very much having just swing failed that high. And if that's the case, are we going to swing fail that low into this zone? So I'm more bearish on Ether. I prefer a bit more of a retracement to get like bigger picture shorts, but maybe we may or may not get that. Ether is very good when volume drops, and it has dramatically. Ether is very good at responding to the 61 fib. So I would suggest you should fib always fib Ether, particularly on the 61. Like Bitcoin will mess around and will sometimes go 50 and sometimes go 78. I have the fibs on Bitcoin, but I don't love them. But Ether is much more reliable and on the low time frame, so always have your fibs on Ether. What else? That's probably it on the highest time frame for Ether. Going back to the normal chart, Ether BTC is the other thing with that, I guess. Binance chart. So yeah, I guess this was basically saying the same, that we're going to have a C wave. So this, okay, I'll just go over this structure quickly. So this was obviously, now we came up and took out that high. In this case, we did have a C wave that just slightly front ran what my original projection was here, slightly lower. And this is always the issue when you have a C wave. So you have a big up move, you have your first retracement, then you have your bounce, and then you're looking at, are you going to get a triangle correction, which is when you get a higher low on the C wave, or are you going to get a zigzag correction? And that's what I would have been explaining here, when you get more of a bull flag. And those are the two most common scenarios. But the whole point of the B wave is that everybody FOMOs in thinking that the B wave is the next bull run, and then they normally get screwed on the drop. Now in this case, obviously, this it did get the drop, and it did, I think it's slightly front run my last level there, which was very irritating at the time. Didn't take these out now because it also took out those levels. What was I going to say? Yeah, so then we've had this last run. We've had this last run up here. Yeah, so I don't know. That just sort of throws me off a little bit. And normally you'd expect, so that's your triangle, and then you would expect this, doing that, but then to break out. And what we've had there is what has ended up as a double top. So again, it's not strong demand, but it is the start of that last up move. So maybe we're going to get another move up from here, but I can't say I'm overly optimistic at the moment. Where is my original chart? Not that one. So many of them. Hide the alerts because they just add more lines than necessary when I've already got thousands of lines on. Okay, so the bigger picture. So on that basis, looking for similar things as Bitcoin, I did have, so my preference, so that green circle was the real must-hold monthly demand there, and we didn't get a hold. It just ran straight through it, and even the entry at the bottom of there, so there was some failed longs. Then because I could see Bitcoin was coming down to appropriate levels, I think I kind of went, okay, maybe we can look at this 4-5 day or whatever that is there, or the 4-5 day below, just for, even if they're just interim bounces, and we do end up either back at the start of this last up move, or as I said a minute ago, at these annual level or 2 monthly level down there, taking out the bottom of that range. So yeah, these are just sort of interim long levels. I don't really like longs on Ether, even on the high time frame, to be honest, because of that conflicting TA, because of the fact we have a double top, we have a giant range, and that we could very easily fall out of the bottom of the range. So anything that we really have in here now is sort of hit and hope. On the short side, so that's the weekly, same as Bitcoin, we've got the 2 weekly demand in there. So again, might get a bounce here, could get a push up to these higher levels, and a similar scenario to Bitcoin where we've got a lot of different levels above that haven't been tested yet. Had this consolidation through here, no test on those higher zones. So whether you get them or not is the hard bit, because over here back in 2021, at least, the run with the channel upwards did test, I think, a 3-day at least on this, I think, weekly supply on Bitcoin. But if you then start not testing, it becomes increasingly difficult. You can see here, again, we've got an untested zone in there. It tested here and then dropped, and then we came, and this is what ended up as resistance. But it could just as easily have been that. Then we had enough consolidation, so when it came up to the next supply, it then only rejected a little bit before running straight through it. So similar here. As I say, Ether does like the 61 fib. I've got a fib over the whole thing, assuming this is the bottom. And the log fibs I just don't like much. Okay, so it comes up to the top of this zone here would be the 61 fib, or from this last down move, the 61 fib's kind of floating. Let's see where the linear are. Linear is a bit better because it's on this weekly level, 61 fib there. There's a 2-week low level and a daily, so at 2,800. So that would be an interesting 61 fib, and again, slightly front running the 2-week, 3-week supply above. And then the 61 fib here isn't really in a great area either. Again, it's just before, but things might get a front run, but there's sort of zones to watch. But it also does say to me that maybe this is not the bottom. That's the other thing I try and look at when I'm looking, I look backwards on fibs, and I kind of go, if this was the bottom, then where would the 61 fib be? Or if this was the top, where would the 61 fib be? And if the 61 fib is just floating in the middle of nowhere, then there's a fair chance you're not actually at the right spot yet. And Ether just does kind of indicate that a little bit. And apart from the fact I don't like the zone it really bounced on in the first place. So back on the daily again, Bitcoin, same as Bitcoin, we had this daily supply on Ether, but it came up and tested it. So Bitcoin's only just tested it now, whereas Ether tested it and almost got the swing fail of that level there. Exactly the same scenario as with, I think I've deleted the CME level now, in that, that was the CME low, and then it has this gap to that level up there. So again, it was something, and I think we can see that more clearly on Ether actually from the CME chart. Yeah, you can see there's the gap, and then it's just come into the bottom of the gap there. If we look back over here, similar scenario, and again, this is not the 2022 comparison, but that we had this big gap, but we were just rejecting around, found resistance at the bottom of the gap and some of these wicks for a long time before actually filling the gap. Interested just to how this looks. I think this is the same Bitcoin as well. I think it's also so this is the 2022 drop, and obviously left a gap there which it didn't care about. This gap below filled reasonably quickly, I guess, and didn't act as a resistance when it did get up there. So it's not something, again, the gap is not something that I would use as a, yes, this is a place to sell or to buy, but it's a place to be wary of and look for price action to give you something. This also is on 2-week demand now on Ether, so on the CME chart, although 2-week demand on the main chart's a little bit lower. So again, there's not much more to say on this. As I say with Bitcoin, you've got those zones above to watch. Should we revisit them? We're now in this very choppy sideways consolidation. We've got a 5-day weekly demand down at this bottom here, and it's the start of the last up move that you can watch if we drop down there. That could coincide with that 113 fib on Bitcoin, which is why it's worth considering. Then there's 3-month demand here, another couple of CME gaps from before. The yearly level, I haven't got the yearly zone drawn in, but that's the yearly level at $700 and then $400, if we're really going to make that 90% drop on Ether. On Ether BTC, another thing that's worth a quick look is, again, it's just kind of floating, and again, just making this, we made this up move here, we've made a similar up move here, we've broken down here, we've broken down here. Are we just going to get, I was, hoping for a test up here, same way as I was hoping for a test up here on this previous up move, which we haven't got. So again, it's just showing that weakness, but are we now just going to come back in, it's made 3 or 4 day supply in there and just drop off down into this monthly zone, which is where my preferred entry. So I guess the upshot of all this is what you can see on Bitcoin, on Ether, and on a lot of the alt market. I'll have a very quick look at the majors. I want to keep this video less than an hour, but on the majors as well, is that everything is very, very corrective movement. So even things that are stronger like TRX, that have gone up or ended up on the month, whereas the others, Ripple, Litecoin, and BCH, are sort of sideways / down. Even the way TRX is moving is not exactly like people are excited to buy this. It's very choppy. Yes, it's holding each demand, which is nice. But the problem is, similar to here, we're leaving these trend lines. So I guess that's the sort of note I'll leave you with on this whole thing, is that locally, yes, we're getting some consolidation, but we're also leaving, everything's leaving a whole bunch of trend lines. So here we had a big trend line of stops. So when it did run back down, I think it had a weekly demand there, but it just ended up running through everything. And the similar concern here, we've got so many stops being left behind that if this is now, so that's why I have been kind of, since we got up to testing this high in the top of this local range, I've been kind of going, oh, can we get a short entry on this? So far, third time lucky. And unfortunately, it hasn't given me a test of this one. It does now have 2-day supply, so you can also potentially look a bit lower on this. It's got a weekly demand, maybe it'll run. But these things are making me very, very nervous. Big drops down to weekly demands below, or in this case, this has a monthly actually. Or are we at the point, we could take out some of the lows down here? TRX is a very strange chart, so I probably won't look at that one too much. But Litecoin and Ripple, it's difficult because Litecoin haven't had any longs on for a long time because this is in a 2-month demand, but it's tested it like multiple times now, so I'm expecting it to go through. So I haven't been looking for any longs on Litecoin. However, it's still in a 2-month demand. Just noticing actually it's dropped under that little local trend line there. So I think that's the thing, look at each chart for itself. Again, similar to Ether, this is a giant range. So if we compare this to Ether, actually, I talked about the taking out of a high, are we going to take out these lows? So Litecoin, you could argue the same argument, but it has had a bounce on the lowest demand there and has spent a good, hasn't gone anywhere, but it's spent a good, 2022, 4 years in this area. So, who knows? I don't necessarily say Ether's going to fall off a cliff and go straight down to here. Ether, that's why we're looking for longs and we're looking for the potential for bounces. Ether could do the same and have 4 years in this lovely little range and never get above 4K or whatever. I can't remember what the top is on Ether now. Feel like I want to say 10K, but I think people were just saying that because that was the target as opposed to where it actually got to. Maybe I'm wrong. I have chart pictures in my head rather than the numbers down the side of the chart. Anyway, so Litecoin is something that I haven't been looking for longs on because you can see from this, it's just painful. So on all the majors, I've been looking for local longs, local shorts. So anything that's sort of presented itself while we've been sideways. So we had a short in there, okay, easy short to start with, but just it hasn't gone anywhere. Similarly here, I had a short entry there, which hasn't quite got hit. I had this from back here. But I've left it in because I thought maybe we'd get another run. We have a 4-day demand here, and I thought maybe we could get another push if Bitcoin's not ready to drop. But again, you can see we've got, onto the daily, you can see the trend line stops and the weakness of this move. Ripple, pretty much the same. So Ripple again, it did have a long entry on a zone that was interesting. So we had a 3-day demand here and a 3-day demand here. So obviously had the big wick through both of them. It came back and revisited that. But again, has annual demand lower. So it's not really an area that I particularly want to look for longs, except maybe just for a test and a drop. But, are we even going to get there? A lot of these, had triangles which broke out and then failed, and they've kind of just moved into these sideways ranges. So Ripple, again, you can see I've got more aggressive short entries on this because I haven't liked where the longs bounced. Time quickly. So made a 2-weekly supply here, so I thought it was worth an aggressive entry. I think it was 2-day inside 2-weekly supply. It's gone through there and up higher. It's weak. All these supply and demands are all weak because they are because they haven't had a decent move off them yet. So they're very aggressive local entries that can be taken as scalps. Similar here, it made a new 2-day supply and I saw Bitcoin was looking like it wanted to reverse. So I did an aggressive short there. That's obviously worked quite well, but whether, it's just going to mess around for even longer in here, and again, whether we're just going to get some messing around or, it's still, and we're not ready to drop, I don't know, or are we going to get that move down finally? BCH was kind of a little bit tight like TRX. It's a bit of an anomaly. So again, talked about this many times. So this has hit, it's got an annual demand here and a retest level. I think it's already tested this. And it also has made, it's got a big 3-month in there as well. I think the annual's a long time ago. But it's got a 3-month demand in there. But again, my concern on this was looking at that chop. I was like, there is, you run the risk that this is going to just power through everything if it wants to. So we did get some nice longs on this annual demand there, on there. But again, it's like when it came back down to test, is it going to do anything? So here's like, what's this 2-weekly demand inside the annual? So obviously we know it's an annual and we know it's a 3-month, but it could still go all the way to the bottom of that zone. These are giant zones. Let me call 3-month quickly. In fact, 3 months already been tested, I think. Maybe not. No. Yeah, so this is, it's kind of a couple of tests on this 3-month. It's not a strong 3-month demand. Hasn't made a new high, but again, I don't want to trade against it. I want that to me is a long until it's not a long, until this zone breaks or until I see some significant supply made. And I think this did make a 2-month and a monthly supply. So you can see here, it already came up and tested that monthly off that bounce. So again, it's like a corrective. Is it going to move? Is it not going to move? And the bigger picture chart is very much just sideways since, when's that, 2024. And I can just see arguments for it going either way. I can see arguments for it coming back down here. I can see arguments that, it broke the trend line, it's on 3-month demand. So those are my current long thesis on this. But I'm very, very mixed. If it does close here, making a new monthly supply, then I'll probably become a lot more bearish. But yeah, anyway, so I've been a bit loath to look for shorts on this one. So I've been trying to pick, at least with the majors, the ones that I'm more biased long versus more biased short. So yeah, Ripple and Litecoin I was more biased short and look for shorts, whereas this has got more green on it because I've been more biased to the long side on this. So if we're going to get a decent move up, this is one I'd like more than Litecoin or Ripple at this stage. Then on to the new majors. So BNB is very similar to BCH actually. Just left these old levels in just so I could show them, but I can hide them after this, thank God. But yeah, so this has a big 6-month demand and then a 3-month side. So I said I had a whole bunch of entries, I think, when we were coming down here as to where it might bounce. But I said like the circled ones or the circled zones were my ones of interest, and that was what that circle was. They were the more, actually, they were the more interesting ones. However, it has wicked, again, it's held the zone, but it's wicked very deep into those zones. But again, my bias has been more to the long side on this, so tried to be a little bit too aggressive in here. Didn't get very far again, but again, it's just the timing of these now. If we are going to either go up or go down, it's like, what's the timing? When you've had this extended sideways, you need to just start watching, when things, if we're going to have a bigger down, we need to see this decent move here and a decent test, and then so while we're trading in here, we're just very much in the range and hoping we're going to get an early move for a break to the up or a break to the down. So on this, for example, a lot of them I alerted this 12-hour supply. BNB I didn't, because this I'm biased to the long side. If it gives me a 6-month supply or a monthly supply or something like that, the 6 months is going to be quite critical in June, actually. Then I'm going to massively get bearish again. And ADA, I've been a lot more bearish. This is weekly supply. Yeah, I made a weekly. I think I might have made a 2-weekly. Sure. No, just weekly supply. So again, I was more bearish. This This I wanted to be bullish on when it had 6 months demand. It was a weak 6 month demand. This was something that we looked at many times, and again, it was that corrective. This gives you that example. We have the A wave down, strong impulse down, then you have this very corrective B move up, and then you get the bigger C wave. And it was, are we going to make that triangle that I talked about, or are we going to make a zigzag? And this obviously now it's sort of clinging onto this as support, but it's not real support. So really, I want this down here. Like, this is not something I want to long at all. You know, I had the long entries on the way down as zones to watch, but I've remained like pretty short biased on this for most of the time. So you can see the shorts there. And it's still difficult. You know, this one, obviously, this is a weekly supply. So even coming up here, it's still holding the zone. But if you're a scalper, obviously that didn't get very far. Gave you a scalp anyway. Or you were holding on to this with a stop at like a lot higher in the hope you're going to get the bigger weekly drop off the weekly into this area. But yeah, for now, I'm still bear bias on ADA. Links are more of the bull side, but is it also a tough one because it's a zone that's already been, I know it hasn't already been tested. So it's the first test of this zone, taking out those 2 wicks. So actually that's a little bit more promising on Link, but I think Link just hasn't given much in the way of long entries. It's now got a weekly demand there, but it's in the same scenario as Bitcoin. If it comes back down to test that zone, is it going to hold given these trend line stops? So I'm not overly confident. And you'll see a few of these, I've got that weekly alerted. Some in there, so people are just looking at this chart. You know, it's certainly something to watch, but it's not something that when I look at the lower time frames makes me overly confident. So that was the 12-hour supply. So again, gave a short off there, and then looking for that long if it comes down into that area. Doggy, another similar structure to Link. It's back down in monthly demand. This has hit the monthly demand a few times, come down and hit the weekly inside it. So again, like, is it going to keep going? Or is this going to pull more of an ADA scenario and end up coming down and taking out these lows and all going lower? Don't know, just a giant range. The case of Doggy, it had a bit more of a clean triangle, I guess, and has broken that. I'm sure my line, oh yeah, okay, I sometimes ignore the first wick. But either way, you know, it's kind of broken something here, but again, in a very, very weak fashion. Gave a short 12-hour supply, didn't quite hit my alert for weekly demand down there, unfortunately. And I think, again, it also still has weekly and 2 weekly supply. Oh, I've made a 2 weekly demand there. Maybe I'm missing, yes, I am actually missing something. Okay, let me just revise quickly. So actually this has made a 2 weekly demand. In that case. So this probably has more potential than anything else with the others at the moment. So you can watch this to see if this can run off here. Yeah, so I had the alert down on that weekly in there. So it could still come back down deeper inside if Bitcoin wants to drag the market down. But you can see how messy it is, and that's why I had to delete. You know, so we have this 2-week demand that I've just drawn there, but really also we're in a weekly supply here. It's a weekly supply. 2 week entire time frame, so that's why I've deleted it. But you can see the chop and the mess anyway. Which is why it makes it very, very challenging to trade in these very, very small ranges, particularly if you're on zones. And we trade low time frame inside high time frame zones. So if we're trading a high time frame zone that's already been hit multiple times, you become much less confident that it's going to hold. And you can see here, you know, it's got a very, very, you know, some people will call this accumulation, and they could be right. You know, and over here we can see similarly multiple hits on this zone, and it's slowed down in here before pumping. So maybe this is going to follow that sort of similar pattern. Maybe I could even draw a larger fractal on this on that basis. The triangle here being the triangle here, and then that run coinciding with that run. I don't know, I could possibly do a fractal on that if I wanted to, but it just becomes hard because at this point you're like, okay, it's holding, is it going to break? And then it just runs. So here again, it's holding, and then you're like, is it going to break? But you can't trade that break. So again, it's like you're shorting on support. In many of the cases of the majors, I am like still shorting support, which is a little bit more risky, but but the group know what they're doing, and they know what to follow and what to not to follow. Excuse me, just having a bit of protein. Yeah, so that's doggy. And again, like on all of these, I haven't really shown the bigger picture, but we have so many. I've talked about these in previous streams. Even if you go back to my streams at the start of the year, not much has changed. I've maybe added some new possible entries on these. I could maybe do another stream next week or something where I go over these in a little more detail. Yeah. Not a great deal would have changed from my previous analysis on these, except maybe some new alerts added to the upside where we've made new supply, because I think a lot of them made new 3-week supply in that sort of middle section here, and some even monthly. You can see ADA here is actually that. I think it flipped it. This flipped a 6-month supply actually, which is why I went very short bias on this. Quickly on ADA. I think it flipped, yeah, and flipped a 6-month supply in there. 6 months, I didn't think we had a 6-month close, must have been off this. Yeah, so it flipped a 6-month supply. So I was then like, okay, we've got a weekly just inside a 6-month, go short. And that's when you get the big moves, is when you see the monthlies. So when we get a monthly and the 2 monthly close in 2 days time, then just watch out for anything that might have made a new monthly supply. Certainly one of these majors I've got a dotted line in because it looks like it might create monthly supply, but I can't at this stage remember which one it is. Maybe it'll be in the last page. No. I'll go back to these quickly. Oh, here we go. That was one. There it is. BCH, in fact. So BCH, which I have the long entry on here, if this doesn't manage to kick off here in the next 2 days, this is going to make a monthly supply at that brown dotted line. So then I'll have to be more short biased on that again. Anyway, finally on the last set of majors, I'll do Solana first. Maybe I'll only do Solana because everybody's most interested in Solana. But again, you can see that very much that similar patterns that we're getting on, that we've got on all the other majors of just mess with weekly supply. It made a 4-day demand. It's got a weekly demand in here. So again, I alerted it, but it's not nice. You can see it's already tapped into that on the lower time frames. This is a daily, but so while the weekly looks untested, the daily has tested this area a few times. So again, it's not an ideal zone, but yeah, I had these weeklies I had alerted from back here, and unfortunately this drop didn't quite hit them. So it is possible we get another move off here, but this is going to rely on whether Bitcoin holds. If Bitcoin holds the 2-week demand, then these will probably hold. If Bitcoin runs through the 2-week demand, which possibly is my bias at this stage, then these are probably going to fail as well. Yeah, so again, Solana just in this tight range. You can watch that weekly level, but I'm not overly confident. It's coming out of 2-weekly supply there, daily above, and then this also has a new 3-month supply up there, so I'd look for shorts if we got to there. So it's just been really messy and really hard to trade in here recently. Some nice entries from when we first had the drop, but then the prices haven't gone anywhere. Near actually was one of the ones that did go somewhere, I guess, because this is probably more of a shitcoin than a major these days. And I still, again, was rethinking whether I need this new majors. B needs to be a whole new set of new majors, because these are really just sort of seem to be dying a death, particularly DOT. Near I always had high hopes for previously because it was on this 3-month demand, but I think it eventually kind of ran through it. That was up here. This has hit the start of the kind of the impulses, but again, giant range in the bigger picture. So it has had a decent bounce there of a swing failure, but I'd be more inclined, looking for shorts if it comes back into this monthly zone. It's left some trend line stops, possibly these things are going to run. But I lack confidence, and I think that with alts, I'm probably not going to go through all these in detail now, but I'll just talk quickly about alts in general. And I will do another video tomorrow on alts, talk more about them, but just to finish the majors off. So I do have an alert here because again, we've got that weekly demand on near, and it front ran this weekly below. So again, you can look at those zones there. This is probably one of the better looking ones at the majors. At least it's on a zone. It's swing failed the previous low inside that zone, that orange line. It's got some space, it's kind of tested here already, and it's got some space. It's less choppy and less painful than the other ones. I would suggest checking the near BTC chart though. Atom, was one I was, again, more bearish on, just because it's a bigger picture I won't look at, but it's super ugly. It also made this new monthly supply already on this, so I was just biased. Got the first test of it, then tried to get a retest thinking hopefully it would be aggressive, but no, went higher inside. So again, could still go up to this zone here. Unfortunately, didn't get the lower high here either. So it's giving lots of scalps off these, but again, the timing on this. But yeah, significantly more bearish on that for it to go down and take out some of these previous low here, the weekly demand, and then all-time low. You know, it's already wicked through that weekly demand. We can flip bullish if this flips a monthly demand. So just hide everything. If that closes above 1.97, let's say $2 in the next 2 days, then maybe we can flip more bullish on this, because I am, again, like, shorting what could be the bottom. You know, I'm shorting right back at support, basically, or potential support. However, having said that, I have seen enough things and just run straight through here and not care. I'm happy to be aggressive, because some of them, if they do work really quite well. And then finally DOT, which again, yeah, is nasty of one. So DOT already, like in contrast to Atom, already broke this low, was significantly on the wick. So again, I've been biased to the short side on this. Made a monthly supply up here, so that would be kind of preferred short entry. However, it did also have, what's that, a daily in there? Yeah, I made a 2-day supply, so I just had that alerted as an aggressive alert. Straight the 2-day. So I had that alert as aggressive alert a couple of days ago. So again, just to see, you know, is it going to get down through this daily demand? But it's still a bit more choppy. I have alerted this low just in case we get a swing fail of that low, but it's not something I'd be confident of for longs really. And this, it's just in a perpetual downtrend now. Like I don't know if DOT's, I don't know enough about the fundamentals, so before anybody freaks out on me saying the fundamentals are great on DOT and they've got a massive future, I have no clue. But you know, from a TA perspective, I need to see something. I need to see a pattern and a pattern break. You know, look at the start of a decent up move, and at the moment, I haven't seen that. You know, we did pump here, and we tried looking for a long on a retest of here, but no, just went straight back through. Yes, it's still on a higher low, but there's nothing here that makes me confident of longs at the moment. And like I say, you can watch this zone down here if we get there, or watch the break of the low and see if it swing fails and comes back inside to look for even a long up to the monthly supply. Oops. Up to the monthly supply here. not doing very well. None of this doesn't select. So either up to monthly supply, or, you know, if we take out the low of that, then it's possible we go up to here and take out the high of the range if we take out the low down here. So there's some range trades in there, but again, there's just better alts to be trading if you're going to trade alts. Yeah, so that's kind of it on the majors. So you can see the difficulties that we've had anyway, and the difficulties that I've had even on Bitcoin and Ether with the high time frame and the competing supply and demand, and the weakness. The problem is that most of the zones are weak now. So whereas historically we've had strong zones that we can have been quite confident that they're going to get a bounce or a push, and a lot of alts it's very much the same. We've got the monthly zones and 6 monthly zones and things. Since we're on dollar, have a look here. Gosh. So yeah, this is very indicative of a lot of alts. So a lot of alts are coming down to test these kinds of levels. They've had a run up. In the case of DOT, you can see it spent a significant amount of time holding this level, but then ultimately hasn't gone anywhere and has broken back through it. And a lot of alts hit this kind of level at the same time as this last down move, so they've just run straight back through. So I had a lot of alerts go for monthlies that just broke straight down. But there's such little PA on so many of these to expect this. The market has to be in the right place. We have to be ready for a bull run. So the main thing I haven't, on the basis of the bull run, is I haven't covered any of these market cap charts in this stream. So I'm not going to do it today. I will try and do a follow-up stream tomorrow where I cover more of this US dollar dominance and the others chart. Because this really shows kind of what you want from alts, or or when I want them. And put very simply as a final thing for this video, like I don't want to be longing this here. I want the alts, and as a whole, there are some alts that run, but I want, I am short biased. I'm tentatively short biased, being we're on demand, but I do not want to long a demand which has been wicked through and then tested so many times and has barely had a bounce here with 2 week, 3 week supply and then 3 months supply and all this supply above. So for me, this is not a place to long alts. I may be wrong, I'm not always right. But everything in the TA says to me, no, don't do that. You want to long alts when we're down here or down here. So if I see something that's counter to that, if we make a new monthly demand or something like that, if we break some supply, then we can change our bias. But my bias is and remains still down on here. And if you go back and look at the ADA chart, then you can really see why I say that. I compare ADA to this and where ADA is now, and that what I talked about with ABC and whether we get a triangle, whether we get a zigzag, bull flag. Those are basically the two scenarios. But do I see that happening from here? No. Not the way things stand, not with everything I see across the market. So anyway, I'm going to end the stream there on that very lovely bearish note that I know everybody enjoys. And, even this doesn't necessarily mean that Bitcoin's going to fall, to be honest, because Bitcoin could run off, Bitcoin maybe holds the 3 months demand, but that's going to kill alts. So if Bitcoin does run, we're already seeing Bitcoin dominance going up. But Bitcoin hasn't gone anywhere because alts are still, as a whole, while we're getting the odd pump here and there, alts as a whole are pretty nasty. You can see that from all the majors, Bitcoin's had a slightly bigger, and Ether have had a slightly bigger retracement. You've got things like TRX that have gone up a bit as well, but all the other majors are pretty much sideways / down. So, yeah, so if Bitcoin runs, we could see Bitcoin dominance run, but others will still die because what little money there is left in the market is going to go elsewhere. The only thing I hadn't covered, which I actually wanted to, was the ETFs. So this is not overly helpful, but I do keep an eye on this just to see whether ETFs are buying or not. So in the last 2 weeks of April, we have had some decent buying. In fact, most of April from BlackRock again. And that's kind of given us positive flows, but we're still getting like trickles out from all the others, and nobody else is really significantly buying. And yes, that could point to accumulation from BlackRock, but also I think when the last retracement that we had, which wasn't as bearish obviously as it is now, but I think the last retracement was on the way up. We also have BlackRock buying, and I think even the last bear market we have BlackRock buying constantly anyway, so I don't necessarily think it's the most indicative of Bitcoin becoming bullish, nor Michael Saylor. Back on 27th of March, and from the week and a half before that, they had some selling. So yes, that's a reasonably good sign. At least they're not all selling, but BlackRock buying it alone isn't great. I'd like to see, if I see it's the full data, I can go to the shorter data and it's a bit easier to see. I'd like to see Fidelity buying, Grayscale buying as well to kind of support the price a bit more. And the other thing we've noticed previously is quite often we see a pump and then we see the buying from the others. So, again, it might be late to the party, but at least then we're more confident. If we see consolidation and then the buying starts coming in from the ETFs, that's when we're going to look for the next up move. BlackRock alone for me isn't enough. What I didn't look at earlier here is Ether. Is Starlink. I don't even know what Starlink is. It's an internet service, but I've never even heard of it in this country, so I don't know why it keeps promoting it to me. Yeah, so again, Ether did have some buying from BlackRock earlier this month, but the last few days not so much. So yeah, so ETFs aren't overly helpful at the moment. Yeah, okay, so I'm going to sign off for the evening. That's 1 hour and 15, so 15 longer than I expected to be, but that's not horrendous. I hope that's useful. Please feel free to join my Telegram channel and ask any questions, or even ask any questions against this video if you want to. I'll come back and check the comments later. And any requests that you have for alt charts or anything like that, hit me with those. and then maybe I can come back to that tomorrow. So have a good evening. Good night.